We'll call to order our Finance Committee meeting, September the 5th. We are probably 9:04. We appreciate everybody being here. It's important that each member is here, and we're going to have some good discussions and some overviews of our goals and our projects. So I think that's good. It's good to be able to have those discussions so we can make better decisions the next time we meet. So welcome, and we'll have Ms. Crystal Lee to do the roll call for us.
Thank you. Councilperson Daniels.
Present.
Commissioner Kaczynski.
Present.
Commissioner McLeod.
Present.
And Commissioner Gooch.
Present.
All are accounted for.
And thank you, Crystal. Do we have any adjustments or approval of the meeting agenda? Do we have any adjustments first?
None from staff.
Okay. Nothing here from our
No, I'm good.
members of finance. Okay, we're good. So
Motion to approve the agenda as written.
thank you very much.
Second.
Okay, we have a first and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion is carried. We can have some, let's ask for opening comments by our Finance Committee members. Georgiana?
This is going to be a rough year financially for SGWASA. We've got a lot of major projects that require a lot of money, and our customers are always our first concern with rates. And I hope that they understand the challenges that we face when we make these decisions and the amount of money we're talking about for the upgrades that are absolutely necessary for good quality of water. And that's the other stone that falls. The rates, water quality, and cost. It's a challenging role, but we hope that we do what everybody feels is best. And I know that the people that are on this board have the same concerns that I do, I believe. And that's what's central to our mind. And I don't believe our staff thinks about it any other way either. So thank you for letting me be here. Thank you for letting me be on this committee. What is this? 5 years I've been on this committee, and I've seen it go from not knowing absolutely anything to knowing more than I wanted to know right about now. But thank you.
You're welcome, Georgiana, and thank you for your comments. Mr. Gooch?
Yes, thank you. It's as Commissioner Kaczynski kind of alluded to, it's a steep learning curve to be on the board of directors to start with, and even more so to be on the finance committee. And we have to keep in mind at all times that the money we spend comes directly from the ratepayers. Occasionally we get grants and such for specific purposes, but these grants are kind of looked at as the icing on the cake, or the extra that comes in that helps us to keep the rates down by spending money that comes from grants rather than what comes from the ratepayers. And we need to bear in mind whether the project is a very small project or a very large project. All of the ratepayers contribute; they pay for it. It's not just one city or one area that pays for it. All ratepayers contribute. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner McLeod?
Happy to be here and listen to what y'all have to present to us today. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I also want to echo what everyone has said. I think every project does count, whether it's little or small, and it's top of our list. We're always thinking the back of our minds, ratepayers, thinking of them, trying to make sure we can keep our costs low as possible as far as their fees. And I'm looking forward to this meeting to discuss and have more conversations about our goals and our projects. So thank you for scheduling the meeting. And I appreciate all the Finance Committee members being here. And thank you so much for the staff for the work they do for us. Next, we'll start out with our team member introductions.
Well, yes. Well, good morning. I'm Schroyer, Executive Director with SGWASA. To my left is Chris Summerlin, Assistant Executive Director. To my right is Richard Balmer, Finance Director and Board Treasurer. And to my far right is Crystal Lee, PIO and Board Secretary. So we're all glad to be here this morning. Look forward to a good session this morning as well with the Finance Committee members. Turning to our goals for today's meeting. And just before I get into the goals, I just want to mention to the board the items that you have in front of you include a copy of the agenda, and then you also have in large format the agenda with all the attachments. Now, we're putting in this 8.5 by 14 version for you because we've included the charts in here. You will need to flip your document into the landscape view at some point when we start to look at these charts. The same information will be presented to you on the screens that you have in front of you, as well as the audience can see what's going on here. So hopefully this is a good format to be able to drill down with all the information that we're presenting today. So goals for today's meeting, quite a few goals. Turning to item 6 in our meeting today, we have a debt review, just in general, to review with the Finance Committee, the authority's existing debt and potential future debt. We have the I-85 Sanitary Sewer Improvement Project, Sanitary Sewer Northern Interceptor funding, and this is to provide the Finance Committee members with a brief overview of the tentative debt funding costs associated with the future project for the Northern Interceptor. Another topic we have today is the PFAS mitigation construction proposed funding, and our goal is to provide the Finance Committee members with a brief overview of the tentative debt funding costs associated with the future mitigation and construction project for PFAS. We also have the Sanitary Sewer Improvement Project summary of costs with SGWASA contributions we're going to be discussing with the Finance Committee this morning. And this is to provide the members with a brief comprehensive update on the costs associated with the project and the contributions made utilizing SGWASA fund balance. We will also have a discussion about fund balance, and this focus will be to provide the committee with an overview of existing available cash and to discuss possible uses of operating fund balance for capital projects, and also to obtain insight from the Finance Committee members on what they consider to be viable uses of the operating fund balance. And last but not least, USDA loan and NCLGC update. And this is to provide the committee members with an update on the USDA loan and the local government commission approval of the required bonds. So as you can tell from our agenda today and our goals, there's a lot of information that we want to share with the Finance Committee members. We believe this will generate a lot of good discussion and some direction for the team here to be able to come back at the next meeting, unscheduled at this point, but we hope to have this scheduled maybe within the next 30 days or so to sharpen what we hear from the committee today, to talk about maybe some of the nuances of how we're going to fund things, what rates might look based on some of these funding decisions, and have further discussion. We have to keep on pace with this because we have some very important projects on the horizon for us that we have to keep in track with, especially with the PFAS mitigation program, which has a defined timeline for us presently, April of 2029. So it's one of those things that we have been preparing for and we continue to prepare for. So unless there's any questions from the Finance Committee members, I'd like to turn to our next item, which is item number 7, which is the review of existing debt and impact of the USDA $35 million loan for the Sanitary Sewer Improvement Project. We have our chart set up. It seems like we start on page 5, and I'm going to turn this meeting over to our Finance Director, Richard Ballmer. Richard?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning,
For
Rick.
those of you who have been on the committee a while, I've been in some of these meetings a while, the first 3 tables and charts you probably have seen before. So they'll be a little repetitious, but it doesn't hurt every year or two to kind of review where we stand and updating the new members in the audience that may be listening. So the first page, page 5, that is the current debt for SGWASA. You'll see that most of that debt has been on the books, some of it since the formation of SGWASA in 2006. Most of the other debt was incurred to acquire the Creedmoor system in March of 2015. You see that the balances in the next to the last column for 6/30/25, which is our last audited year, that our loan debt totals slightly over $14 million. Our bond debt slightly below 11 million. So we have pretty much $25 million existing debt at the end of prior fiscal year. I included a column on the chart this year because we know in some of the upcoming charts we're going to talk about expiring debt, sunsetting debt that will be paid off, and how that could offset incoming debt. So I listed the date of the final payment on each of these debts. You'll see that we have the BB&T bond debt will be paid off on March 1st of 2027. You'll see that the SunTrust, the original formation bond for SGWASA, will be paid off on December 15th, 2026. And the MOU payments to the town of Butner will end on September the 1st, 2027. So as we've discussed in the past, by the time 2028 rolls around and we hope the I-85 project is complete and that USDA bond becomes a legitimate debt, or a final debt, I should say, not legitimate, then we hope there's enough offsetting debt savings from expiring debt or debt being paid off, and we'll see that in the upcoming chart. Any questions on our existing debt? Sure.
So it looks like the balance on the debt from Creedmoor is approximately $10 million more dollars.
Well, if you subtract, that's correct. If you subtract the 882 for the original DHHS bond, that is correct. We have 3 bonds related specifically to the acquisition of Creedmoor, and they do equal slightly above $10 million.
And 2 of them don't expire for over 20 years from now.
That's correct.
Okay. Sorry. I went on Creedmoor, but I apologize for the city of Creedmoor for giving all the debt to SGWASA.
Okay, then we'll move on to page 6. Page 6 is a more detailed view of the debt. It actually lists a year-to-year debt service. We won't dig too deep in the weeds on this, but the difference in the previous table and this table is you'll see there's a column, 3 columns in blue that kind of total those same totals we just saw at the bottom. But then the last columns are the new USDA debt, the new revenue bond related to I-5. So now we've taken existing debt that's already on the books, and we've projected, okay, the USDA debt is going to be this amount, and we've brought that into the equation to see total debt. There's some numbers here we'll go over, but they're easier seen on the chart that follows. So what I did was this takes it out to the end of each debt. I don't think any of us want to worry about what's going to happen in 2067 quite yet. So if we'll turn to page 7, we took it for the next 7 years, which was a reasonable time frame to look at debt and budget and rates. So this is a 7-year chart with the USDA debt coming online. So you'll see in 2026, far left column, that there's your bond debt in dark blue, bottom. The next section up is that's your loan debt. The next section up is your bond debt. And that top section is the town of Butner payments. As you see from what we just discussed, you'll see that as you come across the chart, the town of Butner debt goes away in 2028, fiscal year 2028. You'll also see that bond debt that we just talked about, a huge chunk of that bond debt service this year is $1.5 million. By the time we reach fiscal year 2028, you'll see bond debt's $500,000. So another $1 million of annual debt service drops off from the bonds. We just saw that in that first table. So this is a representation in chart form of what the next 7 years of that debt service looks like. Focusing mainly on the totals, which is what's going to affect your rates and your budget, you'll see that in 2026, you have budgeted approximately $3.739 million for bond service, bond debt, bond loan, debt service. 2027, that will drop to 3.4. Then in 2028, assuming the USDA loan kicks in that year and payments begin that year, that's assuming that construction ends in April of 28 like projected, you see it goes up to $4 million. So from what we have now, you'll have enough debt expiring to offset all but about $300,000 of the I-85 debt coming online. One caveat about the USDA loan. That's calculated using what they proposed to the board and the board accepted, which is $35 million at 3.75%. Keep in mind that if rates drop by the time we close in 2028, we'll get a lower rate. If rates go up, we're stuck with the 3.75. So 3.75 is is the worst case scenario, I guess I would say. As you come across the chart, you'll see that by the time we reach 2031 or 2020, or 2030 and 2031, your debt service is about where it is now, not significant difference. So you have that little peak in 2028 while that last town of Butner is expiring, and then it levels back to current levels. I think it was maybe 2 years ago, as we were getting ready to look at the USDA and apply for an application, we brought this chart in similar form with a different interest rate to the Finance Committee and said, here's what we see, and here's how we think it's going to be accommodated by offsetting, sunsetting debt. So right now, that still is holding true. Any questions on existing debt?
Any chance Butler wants to donate that money instead of collecting?
I don't believe so.
Okay, I just thought I'd throw it out there.
Just a comment if I may.
You can ask.
The charts that you see in front of you this morning, I just want to take you back. Some of the members here this morning on the committee were not on the committee back in 2022 when we started this exercise, late 2021, when we were looking at how to fund the I-85 project, how much we would fund. At that point, we really did not have a lot of information on any grants that we were receiving at that time. So we went through this entire exercise 5 years ago to see on the horizon what was the affordability of the I-85 project, how much could we do when we got to that point. So I just want to let the Finance Committee know and the public know as well that we're not going through this exercise just today. We've been going through this exercise for the last 5 years, and just wanted to stress to the Finance Committee members, we could see all this happening in a 10-year span, and that's why we're able to say this is why we recommend moving forward with this. We got a grant from the state for ARPA. We went after $35 million with USDA and put this whole package together, always looking at affordability. So the reason I bring that forward is we're in the same situation now that we're starting to look at some of these larger projects, finishing the I-85 project that is over budget. For example, the northern portion, we'll talk about that this morning, but really PFAS is really what we're looking at. That's on our horizon. So this isn't our first look today at these type of schedules. We've been having this discussion for the last 2 years, once again, to talk about affordability. So just to let the committee know that this is always in focus. We're always looking at rates. We're always looking at projects and trying to understand how this balances as well. Keep in mind, and I may say this later as well, that at the completion of the sewer project, there's opportunities for additional growth and additional customer base, which is going to be tremendously beneficial to the organization in terms of additional revenue. So I'm not sure, Richard, when we get to that point, if we factored any of that in, but it is a consideration that we look at as we're moving forward. So just wanted to give the committee members some perspective on that as well. Okay? Yes, ma'am.
This chart does not include the PFAS project yet.
The current chart we're looking at projected with USDA loan?
Right.
That is correct. That's just
Right.
our focus presently. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Richard?
Okay. Any other questions before we Did you want to read this part?
Well, sure. We'll just move on to item 8, which is our I-85 sanitary sewer improvement project construction package number 2, Northern Interceptor project funding, a brief overview of the debt scenarios. So we will then turn to page 9 after I just give you a little bit more of an introduction here. And what I thought we would do is, for graphic purposes, I'm going to have Chris come up and just set up an easel for you over here to my left with a diagram of the sanitary sewer project. If you have that just to grasp that. Oops. Let me see if I can help them out here. Need a couple extra hands, don't you? Exactly.
Doesn't lock. Doesn't lock.
Push up one more. Here, let's go up one more. Should reverse that. Good. Okay. Well, here's what we'll do. We'll just set it down here on on this side. Make it easier on ourselves. And go from there. How's that sound?
That'll work.
All right.
Can everybody see it?
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. So
Can audience members see it?
the board has seen this diagram before. Crystal, can you see it on screen?
Yeah.
Okay. See if I can just squeak it in here. All right, so let me just bring the board up to date on our project. So we have a construction package 1 and construction package 2 that you've heard about for many years. So the board awarded a construction package CP number 1 down here previously, and that's what we have current contractor here in construction working on, and it's going very well. Most of the focus is on our pump stations right now. Very deep holes in the ground to build the pump stations, making great progress on that. We have some water line work, and we have some force main work and some sewer pipe going on in this section, so that's going very well. Our second construction package that we put out for bid in the last several months was basically CP number 2. Now, CP number 2 is shown here in the purple lines, and we have what we call the Southern Interceptor, which is our crossing under Highway 85 through here. We have a Northern Interceptor project up here. We have a lift station here with force main coming down into this project here. And the nuance of the two is that we have some improvements here and some improvements over there. That was all part of package CP number 2 that came in. CP1 here ties into CP2. That's basically what happened. So you've got continuity here, downstream, upstream, through this section, and you've got some standalone projects up here. Now, just to remind the committee is that these projects were set up based on some deficiencies up here with some sewer pipe, some deficiencies here in this area. And the idea was that this pipe would serve this region up here for future growth as well. This area here would address current needs and also address future growth in this area, and the same in these regions here. So this portion here, CP number 2, is really primarily your USDA funded portion of your project. We have ARPA project down here. We also have SGWASA that's contributing to this project as well. $6.9 million, correct? About that, roughly.
That's it, yes.
Okay, so we are working through with the League of the Local Government Commission on the financing in relationship to the USDA funding for this portion here of the sewer system. This is the project we're going to talk about today. So when we opened bids, and we advertised once and we only received one bidder, so we didn't open the bids, we advertised again, still had one bidder. The project came in such that it's really, CP2 was over budget in terms of our affordability. We had looked at $76 million for the project, and we're pushing up into the 80s as far as the total project cost. So the good news is, if there's any good news in this, is that this project here that's critical to the success of this entire project came in, what we would say, at our budget. So just around $30 million, and that was pretty much the balance that we had between CP1 and CP2. During the bidding process for these this portion here, we had these bid as bid alternates, meaning we want to know what their costs are, but it was going to give us some flexibility as to whether we could afford to do them and when we could do them. Now, something that's important to keep in mind with all of this is when we look at this design, we look at fixing today's infrastructure, but also building some infrastructure that can serve some needs in the future, which is good. So some of these sections here, if you can afford to build them now, that's great news. But there's also some triggers that say you probably need to address this within the next 5 to 7 years. That's when you're going to have that demand potentially for that. The reason I bring that up is there's some critical pieces here that need to be built now, and there's other pieces that we can wait a couple of years before we have that demand basically to build that. In addition to that, once you open up this section here, you start to open up the viability of additional users coming into the system, which is good. And as you know, there's demand for subdivision development up in this area. Coming into this section, there's also demand in this area to come in over here. And we're receiving a lot of demand coming from the Creedmoor side, if you will, through that area. So when we look at this project in total, we're working on USDA funding of this portion, the LGC and the application. We'll talk further about that. This portion up here is our focus today, the Northern Interceptor. So just to give you an idea of our costs here, the cost for this section came in at just under $8 million, $7.9 million for this section here. So one of the things we're going to look at today is looking at this project in terms of an $8 million cost for this area here. Some of the other sections that came in, this portion here, let's see, the lift station and the force main, $6 million for that portion. $30 million here, $625,000 over here, and different upgrades that we have throughout the project. So when we look at the landscape here in the projects, what we would have liked to have accomplished, of course, was everything within our budget. This was our critical path down here, which we're able to accomplish, which is great. This is the next portion that we would like to talk about up here, because keep in mind that it's one of those if you build it, they will come type of scenarios. So we're looking at how to best manage this project up in this area to see what we can do, whether in total or in increments, to be able to build this. So the flow of this project is downstream to upstream. Okay, just want you to understand that. And the idea of this lift station was to really take demand off of this line and bring it down here. So what we're doing from an engineering perspective is we're continuing to work with CDM Smith and do some modeling in this area to understand current demands and future demands so that we can better understand what needs to be done on a time scale and what the affordability looks like. So I don't have a complete picture for you today, but I want you to know this is what we are working on. But we thought it was important today to at least start to have this discussion about financing so that we can understand how would we package this, how would we do this. Now, as I mentioned before, when you start to build these areas or you have the ability to tie into these areas, you also have the ability for growth and system development fees that come in. Now, system development fees for water and sewer can help offset the costs associated with these projects as well. So that's something that you have to keep in mind all the time. So you may have, and most likely will have, the ability to have some of these SDFs coming in to support the growth of these projects the way it should be, because that's what you're supporting, basically letting the developers pay for that. All right, so that was a large overview of what's going on here. Again, just to kind of recap, this project, CP number 1, has already been awarded and under construction by the board and is moving extremely well. And should you want to visit any of these sites, just let us know and we'll get you a hard hat and we'll get you out there to see it. Basically, a big hole in the ground is all we have at this point. This project here, we do have a vendor. This is CP number 2, the Southern Interceptor. Our goal is to get this to the board for award. I think it's in November. And the reason it hasn't happened yet is because the relationship of this project with the USDA and the interim financing that we have to do, there's several steps that we have to go through, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So we're doing those steps. I think we're on the agenda for the October LGC meeting, which we will attend. And that's our interim financing that we have to do, kind of our construction loan, before we would close with the USDA. So before the board can approve it, we have to have LGC approve it. We have to have the USDA approve it. And then we can bring that package to the board to have you approve the construction package. The contractor wanted to start yesterday, to be honest with you, which is good news. So we will bring this to the board as quickly as possible to get the contract award, to get the project started so that we can keep moving down the road to get this done, because this contractor wants to get done sooner than later so that they can tie into that project. Keep in mind, we can't start up anything over here until we are able to tie into this project down here. So I hope that overview helped.
Mm-hmm.
It does.
Okay.
I have a question about CP2, the interceptor part. I believe you said that was 30 million.
This portion here, yes, that is correct. And this bid cost came in at $7.9 million.
Yeah, I've got that part, and the
Yep.
6 million for the east side
Mhm.
going down.
Yep.
So what was the difference in the CP2 over by Chris and the middle road? Those two sections. Is that in a separate bid as well?
This section
And that, correct.
These were considered bid alternates
Mhm.
here.
This one came in at $1.5 million.
Okay.
And I have a graphic I can share with you as well. I'm reading off some notes. I didn't provide that to you, but I have a cheat sheet here.
Excellent.
I'd be
I would
happy
love
to present
yes.
that to you as well, just to kind of give you a synopsis. And this document we've been using, just trying to figure out who's coming in, which development's coming in where, what are we building, what are the costs, and how do we move this around as far as priorities go.
Yeah, that'd be great to have a
Yes.
copy.
Okay, very good. Make sure that we have that.
So
Questions?
ever since this inception of I-85 came, you've told us throughout the years that there were alternate sections built into this.
Correct.
And I'm grateful that there are, because apparently now we're going to have to use them.
Mhm.
But so that the newspaper quotes me correctly, as one of my fellow commissioners stated, this is not anything different than we've said all along. Even at the groundbreaking over here of the I-85, the chart indicated they were alternate projects.
Correct.
That they were a way for us to find a way, if the prices came in too high, we could make some adjustments.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm grateful that we have them, and I'm sorry that we have to use them, but I'm glad that we do have them.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you bringing that up because we anticipated we may be in that scenario because the construction market and the cost that we were seeing drove us basically to make those decisions. If we had just lumped everything into one project, we would have had to go through the same thing. So we said, let's do it ahead of time so that we can do a la carte. And that's basically what we have to do.
So you said this guy wants to start yesterday,
Mhm.
and he knows that we have to go through these other
Mm-hmm.
approvals. Is it going to change the price?
No, not at all.
Okay, I'm just because we're delaying them, and that's what I was concerned
Well,
about.
and they understand it, and the contract specification says they must be done by a certain date or there will be damages, liquidated damages. So, of course, they can see that due date, and they're working back from there. So they want to get the notification and proceed as quickly as possible just to get their materials on site and to continue working. So it's great for us that we have a great contractor we're going to award this to, and they're also anxious to get started on the project for us, too. So
Okay.
I'm very confident that we can get everything through the LGC, the USDA, into the board for your review and approval by our timelines and get our notice to proceed with the contractor, and we get started.
Does anybody remember what size pipe is in the ground from Joe P?
Tell them.
It's an 8-inch.
8-inch. So we're going from an 8-inch to a 20-inch.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't there a 6-inch somewhere in the middle of that? There was 6-inch at some section.
I don't think it's here, but yes, just to give you an idea of the upgrades that we're doing through this area in terms of the size of the pump from the old Joe P 24-inch to the new Joe P, the 20-inch force main that comes through this area, the 16-inch. This is a major upgrade again to this pump station, 24-inch to here, and flows through that area. So,
Yeah, and the problem from the beginning with the Joe P. Road pump station was not necessarily the pump station. You could upgrade that, but the line in the ground was so small you couldn't get the wastewater through it to get into the Butner system. So therefore, you had to do both. You can't do one. You have to do both in order to upgrade to accommodate.
that's
You could
correct.
have an explosion.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I seem to recall too, there was quite a few repairs to Joe P.
Still
lift
there's
station.
been
There
repairs
still
and
are.
upgrades over the years, but the
I think-
blockage is
Right,
the blockage for future development is not the pump station itself, it's the line in the ground.
right. But I do recall there was many repairs to it. I think that's one reason we had to start there.
Yeah, and that line in the ground has been, that was the reason we don't have allocation from Great Moore.
Right,
I believe the pump station in its current state
Is that maximum?
is capable of pumping, but it can't force it through the line.
right. It had to be upgraded.
Yeah,
It was pretty much maximized as far as the size of the pump
Yeah.
station, its
Right.
capacity, and a combination of the line. So I think that you can appreciate the size of a 36-inch line, basically an interceptor sewer. That's a 3-foot pipe, basically with this transportation. There's additional improvements that are needed further east of here in Creedmoor as well, but a lot of those, from what we've seen the last couple of years, are really kind of developer-based improvements, things that they need to upgrade in order to get into the system. So a lot of activity out in that area. So, all right. So Any further questions before we move on to the charts and the graphs? And we can always come back to this if you have any questions. No?
Okay.
All right.
Scott, I know we can't use it for revenue projections, but you mentioned system development fees that will come in the future. We don't know how much or when, but there will be system development fees as companies, developers hook on. And then there's also the increased revenue from the users, from the end users. So therefore, that's going to change the picture, the financial picture. But we can't use that today because you can't figure on projections. You have to figure on what you have coming in today to do your projections.
Well, I think it's a combination, isn't it, Richard? Don't we have some capability or some of that built into some of these projections as far as the USDA, as far as our worksheet?
Most of the projections today, we haven't built in new growth. We built in continual growth in line with the pattern we already have built into our rate model. We kind of discussed that internally, and we see that development coming online probably outside of the 5-year point of this chart. So when you get into that 7-year and above, so 2 years from now, when we bring this back to you, that may be different. We may be far enough along with the project where we have developers lined up, SDFs lined up, the number of homes lined up, where we could project those. But right now, I think we're too theoretical what may happen in 3 years when it's built. So we didn't want to build in guesstimates at this point. We'd rather have better estimates built into the actual data. So they're not in any of the charts you have today, but I would expect to see that in the future.
Yeah.
As we get closer to completion and we get closer to knowing what that growth looks like. We talked about projecting that now, but 3 years out, you could have another 2008 where you go from booming to bust. And we wouldn't want to build our whole financial stability around that boom or bust theology. So,
You're taking a very conservative financial approach.
I always do.
I know.
I always do. I'd rather come to you and tell you things look better than to come to you and tell you we're in trouble. So I always take kind of a conservative view on financial projections.
And I appreciate that.
To one point before we get to this chart, to kind of expand on what Scott and Chris said, we do have an I-85 section at the back of the discussion, and that will bring all these costs that you were jotting down, that will bring these more into perspective in a single chart, and so we can really dig into it again at that point if you'd like.
Chris just was excused to make some copies of the document that I have so that we can present this to you. So no, go ahead, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
So this chart, based on what Scott just presented to you, the Northern Intercept is not built into CP1 or CP2 any longer. It's not being funded by ARPA. It's not being funded by USDA loan. It's going to sit as a separate project for the board to consider when and how it can be built and funded. So this chart took that into account and said, okay, let's take that previous chart, which is our loan debt, our bond debt we know we have, including the new USDA, which is kind of a done deal at this point. And let's top that off, assuming we had to borrow another $8 million from USDA. They have shown interest, to Scott's point earlier in the conversation, that they want to work with us in future projects. USDA mentioned that to me in a phone call on Monday again, that this project has been so successful and SGWASA has done such a good job with it that they are very interested in partnering with us on future projects or a continuation of this project. So what we did is we said, okay, suppose we were to borrow that $8 million from USDA, which would be a 40-year loan, which is preferable, of course. You want to stretch that debt service out to make the impact to the annual debt service as small as possible. And we assumed the same rate as the one we're dealing with now, 3.75%. Now, would that be in effect at the time that you go through the application process? We don't know. But we think that's a good benchmark to use. So this chart you see, you have now a top section above the USDA $35 million loan, strictly for an $8 million loan. So you can see we're assuming that the completion starts and ends in completion of the whole project ends in 2028, just like the rest of the project, and the debt service would start that year. So you see now, 2028, we're at $4.4 million in debt service. The previous chart for 2028 was $4 million. So we've added, as you can see, $389,000 to our debt service by borrowing $8 million from USDA for the Northern Interceptor to be built. And so you will see now you're reaching a point, if you fund that, you've got about $400,000 a year that's going to have to be built into budget. Budget comes from rates. So that $400,000, unless we can find offsetting operating cost, would probably result in a rate increase, of course. And you see how that affects the trend going across. It has the chart has the same trend line. It's just topping it off with an additional roughly $389,000 per year, $400,000 for discussion purposes, each year for 40 years. Any questions on that? Okay. Did you want to jump in PFAS?
One thing, Rich.
Sure.
You're talking about the 2028 projection
Mm-hmm.
and the probability of a rate increase to cover that.
Mm-hmm.
But also, when we get 3 years from now, the projections may very well change based on the possibility of development coming. Is that
could
correct?
be true. That's correct. As we talked about a few minutes ago, this does not assume abnormal growth. It assumes just normal growth. So by the time we get to budget process with the Finance Committee and the board for that fiscal year, we may have enough offsetting revenue so that rates would not have to go up. That is true. You have to also take into account that operating expense increases are not factored into any of these charts.
Right.
So, we all know going anywhere these days, the cost of something today is not what it was 3 years ago. So by the time we get 3 years out, we don't know. So that will be reviewed annually with the budget, with the Finance Committee. But that's a good point.
And I would like to add to that your chart shows the interceptor funding for the northern section of pipeline at the full cost of $8 million. Did you say $7 million or $8 million on this? $8 million. Mm-hmm. You remember I pointed out that we're still going through hydraulic analysis on that northern interceptor pipe to determine over the next 5 years, for example, if a developer's coming in and they're going to build 800 plus homes and we're going to have growth in that area, the developer has said we're going to phase that development over 5 years. So the incremental flow per year based on that phasing, those number of homes that are going in. So the analysis that we're doing right now and have been doing as far as the modeling, we should have those results, I think, next week. We have a meeting. We're matching up what in this segment do we need to fix now and what would we need to fix or upgrade to accommodate a phased build over 5 years, okay? And I think you can see where I'm going with this. Mm-hmm. So even though the charts look at, in that year, an $8 million debt scenario, this could be a $2 million project over the next coming years where you're not really taking on the debt load of $8 million to finance this, but you finance a portion of it that you need now, and then you can take some of the offsetting SDFs as they're coming in and putting it towards the project so that you're building the project as it's needed and not really taking on this huge debt load on the front end to put the entire project in the ground. So those are some of the things that we're looking at as well to balance the whole financial portfolio here. But we wanted to look at, I asked Richard to run the charts for us on, well, what would it look like if we jumped into an $8 million project and did everything now? So it's nuanced, and the reason for the discussion today so that we can continue to work on these refinements as we come back to the committee here and talk about these projects and actual debt load moving forward. So we'll have that information in the next.
I was going to say, Scott, isn't it possible that some of these segments too can also be required of the developers and the credit system development fees back to them?
That is correct. Yeah.
So that's something else we're evaluating.
And I guess I'm using that loosely when I say SDFs can pay for portions of these projects, but there's that relationship that's out there as well, which makes it somewhat challenging. I think this is a huge project, a huge success for SGWASA as far as what we're doing overall. The other portions will need to be built over time. It's just a matter of how they're built and when they're built over time and how they're financed. The big project, really, the grand project for us is really the PFAS project that we have to talk about. As we know, again, and we'll talk about that, I think, next, due dates on that, large costs on that. What are the options, to move on that as well? So.
I don't want to ask this question, but I have to ask this question. All this upgrading and this enlarging of the pipes and everything that is going to send more wastewater to our plant. Is our wastewater treatment plant okay for the amount that we expect that will flow to it after this project is done? Or are we going to need to upgrade the wastewater treatment plant like within a year of this project being done because it can't handle the capacity?
No, presently we have the capacity in the system for this growth, but you will need at some point, SGWASA need to upgrade that facility. And there's other qualifiers out there as well. There's the Falls Lake rules, stage 2 that we have to look at. We also have the ability to, and we know this from our working with the system, there's a lot of inflow and infiltration, clean water that gets into our system. So anything that we can pull out of that system in the future helps us as well. The bad news is at some point you're going to be looking at probably PFAS reduction at your wastewater treatment plant as well. There's nothing on the rules yet, but it's the industry talk, the regulations. That's probably where this is going. So you're going to continue to have large costs associated with PFAS reduction.
But for right now, this project will not impact the operation of the wastewater treatment plant immediately.
No.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
That's good news.
Anything else on that topic before we move to PFAS? No.
Are we trying to avoid it? You want me to keep asking questions or we can delay it?
We're here all day. We're here all day.
Especially inevitable.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to item 9, PFAS mitigation construction funding, a brief overview of the debt scenarios. So I am not going to, unless the board requires that, I am not going to be long-winded on the PFAS project. The board, I believe, is very well educated on what we're doing with PFAS. We just did an update on our pilot program at the last board meeting, provided the board with that information. I also provided you with a month-end report for August that includes all the information about PFAS. So I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have regarding where we are in the process. Suffice to say, we are just continuing to move forward with completing the pilot project. We already know basically what type of system we're going to need. We just haven't resolved the filter media at this point, but we're working on that at the same time. We do have a grant from the state and going to be bringing a resolution to the board in October, along with an engineering agreement for the PFAS work. The board's aware of this grant that we got, the $5 million. I brought that to the board's attention back in May. There's a formal resolution that you have to do for that. I wanted to bring that together with the construction scope of work that is associated with that grant money, if you will, for the PFAS project. CDM Smith, that will move us into the design process, basically. So that's on the horizon as well. Hopefully that's enough information right now, but happy to answer any questions you have regarding the PFAS project.
I'm good.
All right. If not, we'll move on to our projected PFAS funding debt service 7-year review. Richard?
Okay, so what this next chart is it has all the existing debt, with 985 USDA debt. We dropped off the Northern Interceptor, and let's say that's funded some other way. What would PFAS do to our debt service annually? So the top bar now becomes PFAS. This is calculated assuming we had to borrow $26 million for PFAS reduction at 4%, 20 years. That's assuming a DEQ loan. Now, Scott has updated you to his point earlier that, there may be some grant opportunities out there that we're still applying for, but we said, suppose it turns out to be a $26 million project and we're going to have to fund it ourselves. Suppose there's no more grant money after the $5 million coming forth. What would be the worst case scenario? So that's what this chart shows you. So you'll see that in this case, we said, okay, it won't be completed until late 28, early 29. So fiscal year 2029. So unlike the other charts where the new debt is coming online in 2028, you'll see the extra bar is added this time in 2029. And that's why. It's because we wouldn't anticipate this debt service starting before June 30th of 2028. And you'll see that basically a $26 million loan with DEQ for 20 years would result in a $1.8 million annual debt service. Now that, as you can see, is significant. Where you see in the far left-hand corner, 2026 right now our debt service is 3.7. So if we fund PFAS through a loan at that rate, those terms, by 2029 your debt service would go to 5.7. Basically a $2 million increase, or $1.85 million increase. And you see that continues for 20 years until some of this other debt starts sunsetting, which is quite a ways down the road. Any questions on that?
A lot of money.
A lot of money annually, correct. That would have a dramatic impact. I'll remind the committee that our new rate model, our new rate structure, is that debt service is now funded 60% from volume rates and 40% from base rates. So it would affect both your volume and your base rates, but your volume rates. So it would affect your higher usage customers more. But it would affect all customers if you were to have to fund this through rates. All right, then we'll move on to the next chart. So the next chart, we said, suppose all of this debt were to hit. Let's look at that worst case scenario. What if we borrowed USDA money for $8 million to fund?
You're just a ray of sunshine today, aren't you?
Well, what we wanted to do, we all know, and Scott has been very forthcoming with this in board meetings, that we've got a lot of projects, and I think some of you mentioned that at the beginning of this meeting. We have a lot of needed projects, some of them mandatory projects on the very near horizon. And so we said we have to face the fact that what if and how will we look at these? And so we thought it best to bring to the committee and bring everybody up to date on what some of these numbers look like, because in this board meeting or that board meeting, you hear this piece of the puzzle and that piece of the puzzle. We wanted to bring all those pieces together for all of us to get a clear picture of what this scenarios look like. So that's what we, but yes, it's not pretty. These are not the prettiest charts I've ever done by any means. No. When you start talking about debt service and the bars go up, that's never a good thing for a finance director. So this scenario, this chart has existing debt, I-85 USDA debt, which is deemed almost current debt at this point. Now we've topped it off with the $389,000 for the $8 million USDA loan Northern Interceptor debt and the PFAS debt. So this is those two projects added on. You'll see that we're at the 3.7 in 2026 still. You'll see that as all of these come online by 2029, your debt would go to $6 million a year. So you're increasing your debt $2.3 million. For sake of discussion, we'll just round it to $2.3 million. Substantial increase in annual debt service. And of course, that $6 million would stay at 5.9 to $6 million for many, many years to come. Any questions on those numbers? I'm trying to overwhelm you with charts. So
You're not very positive. I haven't heard any positive.
That's why I said he's a ray of sunshine this morning, isn't he?
He's positive. It's a lot of money.
As Mr. Gooch said earlier, I'm conservative. Trying to scare you a little bit before I give you any good news.
Well,
Give that to Ken.
Yeah, I think the only thing pretty here are the colors we used on the charts, quite honestly. But again, I think that you start to grasp, especially from this chart, what we walk and talk every day, looking at what's nice and what's necessary. And that's why you can see when we factor in the USDA loan debt, the $35 million in the orange bars there, that's pretty much assumed because we're in the project. We don't want to assume that, well, we won't get the Southern Interceptor done. You have to have a project finance, so you can't do that. But you now start to see get some perspective visually and financially between the Northern Interceptor and the PFAS project. And now it really starts to come into focus that if you have to do PFAS, well, wait a minute, how much of that Northern Interceptor project do we have to do? And that's That's the road we've been going down for the last 2 months with this analysis and looking at that to try to squeeze that number down as much as we can. And also something to keep in mind, and I know Richard's going to get to this eventually in the charts here, is these are fully loaded costs for financing. There is no offset from any type of cash.
That's correct.
That we're putting into this to reduce this cost. So if you inject $5 million cash into a $26 million project, what does that look like? If you put $4 million in cash into an $8 million project over a 20-year term, what does that look like? So none of that has been done. So just,
Right.
I want you to appreciate that as well. We're getting to some of that, at least that discussion, but keep that in mind. Okay.
So I guess a few questions I have before we move forward. So I know what STEM has coming on board. Do y'all know what developers have approached y'all to go to Creedmoor?
Mm-hmm.
I can answer that.
Mm-hmm.
So I know what we're looking at is 284 homes plus commercial property coming on board possibly within the next 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
I know Butner's got 800 homes looking, as long as this Northern Interceptor happens, they got 800 homes sitting right there with over the next 4 years.
We have two developments. One is Creedmoor Village, which is residential and retail or commercial, which is going right at the edge of the Butner-Creedmoor line. And then we have another subdivision that has not been approved by Creedmoor, but it's between 600 and 800 more homes. So those are the two that I'm aware of. I think that's all we have right now.
Right. And we have additional interests east of Creedmoor in the county as well. So we have a lot of pins on the board as far as things that could happen. Will they happen? We're
Now,
not
is
sure.
Brames already calculated into this?
Yes.
Because Brames is 177 they're building now.
Mm-hmm.
So that should open in the next year,
That was
I
part of
think.
existing capacity that was factored into existing GOP.
So we could see some of these numbers come substantially lower.
Let's hope.
Well,
I don't see, let me say it this way, the ratepayers, I don't see $2.4 million is going to happen. You're almost doubling what you're provided right now. People that are paying, including myself, a water bill, I'm not going to pay double. And that's pretty, I'm not going to pay double.
I respect that. I think the challenges that we have are, what do we need to do now to accommodate some of this additional growth, if that's what we want to do? The I-85 project itself, when it opens up, let's just call it January 1st of 2028, you now have the ability to have this construction come into that. How fast will they come in after 2028? Is it 3 years? Is it 4 years? Is it 5 years? It will happen.
If it goes the way we're going today, it'll come in pretty quick.
It will happen.
Yes.
To your point, some of the existing developments occurring in STEM currently are part of our normal growth projections that we have already factored in. So we accommodate those extra 200 homes that we know they're going to come in, and some infill, but it's not the heavy loads that are coming in. A lot of designs and positioning for developments from developers, but nothing is inked, nothing is guaranteed. So that's just one of those things that, yes, the future looks good in terms of some growth in this area and additional customers. And once you have a larger customer base, then your rate increases aren't as large because you spread it out over more customers. The challenge is really going to be, and I've heard from the board, we want PFAS now. We want it finished
Right.
tomorrow. Okay,
Absolutely.
so the challenge then is a $26 or $30 million project. What are we going to do with that? How much are we going to build? How much are we going to offset with cash? How much are we going to look at as a 40-year loan with USDA? And what effect does that have on rates? That's I think, for our next meeting, that we'll be able to fine-tune that and show you what that is. PFAS currently is not something we can just take off the board and say we're not going to do it. It's a given. We're going to have to do it. Can we cut the cost in half or bring it down to 17 million instead of 26 potentially? I think the board has appreciated as much as we have in this post-COVID area that construction costs have just skyrocketed. And keep in mind that everyone across the U.S. is working towards the same timeline to get completed with the PFAS systems in place, supply and demand. So it's going to continue to ink up. So appreciate your comments. Hence the reason for the discussion today is we're trying to put this portfolio together and understand how best to move down the road with these utility costs.
I have a question for Richard, just hypothetically. How many ratepayers or that you would need to save $1 million?
To save
Or to, not save, but how many, to have revenue of $1 million, how many ratepayers?
I don't have that, but I can bring it back to the next meeting.
Okay,
But if you just use the benchmark of $100 a month per household,
mm-hmm,
and you use 1,000 households, because we discussed 800 in one project, 300 in another, so round it down to 1,000. You're talking about $100,000 a month or $1.2 million per year revenue generated by 1,000 new ratepayers.
okay. 1,000 new ratepayers.
Yeah, it's just, I just
I was just,
rounded things. And
right, that's a good example. I was just thinking of the volume, 1,000.
We need to know the net revenue though, right?
That there are that's where I was going.
Yeah.
So that is gross revenue. That's correct. That's a fairly easy, straightforward calculation.
Yeah.
The reason I didn't want to offer a number on the spot is
I'm very
because we've got to talk about operating costs. That's not free water. That's more chemicals.
Right.
That's more
Yeah.
pumping. That's more electricity.
It's more staff.
I'm not sure about staff. I
Yes,
believe that
more
was
staff.
operational people, but there are operational costs that will dig into your 1.1 that you just calculated. The other thing is there was one other aspect of it is when you drop 100 more homes or 1,000 more homes into the rate model, then it looks at capacity that residential versus commercial versus institutional is costing. That's how the rate model is built. So it may lower the cost for, let's say, an institutional customer because your volume rate may change. So you've got some offsetting costs there. So I'm always afraid to just take. But that is
simple.
true in gross revenue. That is the exact right. That's the right answer, but not net revenue.
So, I mean,
It's not a technical
right,
answer, but it's a very basic, simple calculation, and some households are going to use more, some are going to use less.
and for what he's saying,
And
you'd
the
probably,
cost is going to fluctuate.
mm-hmm,
So there's a lot of variables there, but
Yeah.
that's just a very basic.
right. So, just talking about ballpark figures, 1,000 was a good
Yeah.
example for you to share with us. And with his expenses, that means you need more.
Mm-hmm.
You need more.
And also, when we were talking about the I-85 project in the very beginning, weren't we estimating this project to be, when completed, it should carry us at least 20 years into the future?
Correct.
Well, that's also up in the air. Depending on the economy, it could carry us 40 years into the future if the economy collapses and you don't have building. But if you have a building boom, it may only carry us 10 or 15 years into the future. So it's,
Oh,
it's everything is a calculation
yeah, right.
and a projection.
So today, we're just doing the basics. We are brainstorming, about the future and our projects, but I think we're at a good place right now. We're just showing the basics, and I appreciate all the charts, Richard. It's been very helpful.
And that's why we do the updates, and we do it updated annually because
That's right.
projections change.
Right.
And to Mr. McLamb's point, each year as part of the budget process, we actually take into account growth that occurred that fiscal year. And we build those into the rate model. We say, okay, instead of our projected 50 homes, it was 150 homes. So we go change that projection, which lowers rates across the board because now you got more ratepayers. But when you get, to our earlier conversation, when you get 3 to 5 years, this builder is going to come, we didn't build that into here. We would build it into ones as we get closer to time, as ink, to Scott's point, as ink is put to paper, or as we're within a year of doing budget, then those become clearer and more stable to forecast based.
So what numbers I see when you do? I just said 6.1 million because you're at $6,090,000.
Mm-hmm.
That's an 85% increase from where we're at today.
Roughly correct.
By the numbers I just did, it's right at 85%. There is no way that the ratepayers that are sitting, that I can vote to raise the rate 85%, ever.
Again, we wanted to give you the worst case scenario here. There's no offset built in this with system development fees or anything like that. So that's the unknown here.
Right. I know you're giving worst case scenario, and I know people are coming here, wanting to come here. I understand that, but I just got to make it clear, 85% increase, there's no way.
Well, I think it's important for the committee and the public to stay informed because to Scott's point earlier, PFAS is here. We say we can't do it fast enough, right? If we couldn't find other funding sources and if our revenue doesn't increase, if we won't have a boom between now and 2030, this is what you're looking at. So we want you to be totally informed before you make the decisions and award contracts about what our funding sources are, what the project costs are, and how we proceed. So this is an informational thing of what could happen. It's by no means 5 years out what is going to happen. But as you're making decisions in the next few months on some of these projects, we thought it was best for you to see what the worst case scenario picture would look like for those projects. So you'd have in your head, 26 million costs this much debt service. Okay, well, we can do it for 20 million. Okay, well, that's better. And it gives you some benchmarks to go by.
So from what I'm seeing from most of this, we need to slow down on some of the projects that we're doing. I know we can't slow down on PFAS, but some of the other projects that we don't have to do, they need to slow down.
Well, that's a board discussion, and that's why we're bringing you this information so that you can have those conversations and the information to have those conversations. I don't have an opinion on that. That's an operational board decision on what projects you deem are most appropriate. I just want to bring you the numbers that those projects would cost you.
Sorry, Board, I'm just throwing my opinion out there.
Thank you, Kenneth. I won't sleep for the next month now.
Richard, the projected loan on the PFAS 26 million, I believe you said is a 20-year 4% NCDEQ.
That's correct. That's correct.
I don't believe we have a charging here for a 26 million USDA 40-year loan, correct?
We do not.
Okay, so keep that in mind.
Okay, I want to pause for a minute. I think Jim might want to speak.
All right, I just had a couple of points, and Scott can cut me off if I'm going somewhere you don't want me to, but bottom line is the PFAS regulatory compliance, and you put in a number as a placeholder to provide a projection. And so that's something that we currently have to do. Are we updating the system development fee analysis, or do we have a plan to at least communicate that to the engineers that did our calculations so that we can take that into account in the system development fees we're charging quicker than the regularly scheduled 5-year review period?
So we just did that update last year, I believe. Is it 2024? 23, 24, 23, we did that. So we took all that into account, and that calculated everything on this project into those system development fees. I don't think that we did at that time. I don't think we did projections with the PFAS.
That just might be something that we want to consider, but that's certainly a managerial issue rather than a legal one. But it just, if we know that we've got a large cost like that coming in, rather than letting it lag for the full 5 years, that might be one way to alleviate some of the concerns too.
Well, and I think that during our presentation to the board, we said we weren't going to wait 5 years.
Right.
We're required to do it at least once every 5 years. But
So
I think we said that in a 2 or 3 year period, we should be looking at that. In fact, Chris brought that to my attention last week, just to go through all this, just to ensure that we had those calculations into our STFs, which we do. But I don't think that we had the PFAS numbers at that point when we were doing those projections in 2023. So yeah, that would be something that we can factor in as well. So my point was, you're looking at the cost of PFAS 26 million over 20 years. I would say cut it in half over 40 years, but that's a projection that we can run as well to see what that debt load would look like for that cost. And again, keep in mind that there's opportunities to instead of leveraging USDA for $8 million, for example, for something we might be able to afford in-house, right? The Northern Interceptor project, to leverage USDA for PFAS over a longer term. And then we're still working through the engineering design based on our current flow at the water plant to say we know that we're permitted for 7.5 MGD at the plants, but we're only pushing out 3.5 or 4 million gallons a day. So could you build the entire structure, the envelope, and put in the containers that you need for 15 million, and then build the rest as you need it as the demand requires that. So I think that you can tell that there's a lot that is a lot of scenarios and variables that we are looking at, and this meeting is very important, and the next meetings to help us align the vision for things that we need to do, especially a regulatory basis, the things that we would like to do, and the things that we need to do moving forward. So it will come into focus. And then at some point we'll be having discussion as to, okay, so we have the roadmap as far as what we want to do and what we need to do. So how do you save for this project? You're going to have this expense for PFAS, let's say in 2029. It's currently 2025. So are you going to look at potentially incremental rate increases to set aside so that you have that money available in 2029? Or are you going to take that giant step in 2029 when you need it? So those are things that we'll have to discuss as well once we get things a little bit more in focus. Part of the package. Very challenging.
And if I can say one other thing. The other thing that the board needs to be focused on too is the Falls Lake rules reexamination that's coming up.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, we have a poundage limit in what we can discharge from our sewer plant that limits us before we actually get to our flow capacity. So as we're beginning to think about things that can be substantial costs looking out to the future, if we don't get that changed in a way that's beneficial to the regulated jurisdictions, then your cost of being able in the future to go past about an additional 5,800 homes is going to be substantially higher than it would be otherwise. So just make sure you guys are following that and stay engaged. We'll be working hard on that issue over the next 12 months. The UNRVA will probably be pushing its own version of rules. We're sort of at a bit of a impasse with DWR with their opinion of how that the rule should play out for the regulation of the sewer facilities. And so that will be something that we're all focused on over the next 12 months.
CP1 has to be done. The CP1 is funded by ARPA funds, and ARPA funds have to be spent by December of 2026.
That's correct.
So there's no way that this project can be stalled, stopped, diverted to another project at all. We are under the gun on the CP2 because we accepted the ARPA funds. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. I just wanted to get that fact out there.
Yes, and I apologize. I was writing a note. The ARPA funding is, as you saw, construction package 1. And we're very much on track with that project, getting that financed and done and invoiced for reimbursement by December of 2026.
It has to be expended and reimbursed, or
Right.
submitted for reimbursement. And you'll see that a little closer when we get to the I-85 summaries coming up. There's a good depiction there, I think, of where we stand on that project, because that's been large and incremental. That'll give us a big, broad view of where we stand today with all those pieces pulled together in one chart.
We would like to request maybe just a 10-minute break, recess.
Sure,
Would that be okay?
sure,
Just
absolutely.
the amount of time that we've had at the table here. Would that be
Yes.
acceptable?
Yes,
Okay.
Yes.
absolutely. We'll take a 10-minute recess. Okay, it's 10:30.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it. So great discussion so far. A couple of items left on our agenda this morning. Next item is item number 10, the Sanitary Sewer Improvement Project, summary of costs and SGWASA contributions. You will find this information on page 14 of 17, and the chart is already up on screen. So Richard, back to you.
Okay, so we thought now was a good time, especially in this meeting, the board has approved different pieces of puzzles over the course of 2 to 3 years now. So I track these monthly. But I don't think the finance committee or the board has seen a comprehensive view. Now we have all the bids in. We're getting ready to possibly award CP2. We now have the USDA revenue bond budget nailed down as of about a week ago with the LGC application. So now is the perfect time to pull all those pieces back together and give you a comprehensive project overview of what's been awarded and what the expected costs are. So we'll go through this in a little more detail. Some of it you already know, but it wouldn't hurt for us to refresh our memories. So as you'll recall, the CDM design contract was slightly above 5.7 million.
So moving from left to right on the chart, correct?
Correct, moving from left to right. So the CDM Smith and Engineering Design was 5.7. I think that was awarded 2.5, 3 years ago. That's almost fully completed now. Recently, you awarded the Construction Administration Construction Oversight, the CACO, to CDM Smith for 5.7 million. That's the next bar. Third bar over is CP1 Construction, which as Scott indicated earlier in his update on the board, was almost 35 million. That's the construction for CP1. The bids are in for CP2, as Scott indicated earlier, for just over 30 million. That has not been awarded yet. As Scott indicated, that's hopefully going to come to the board for award in November. We'll talk about that when we get to the LGC section. Then we'll talk about the SGWASA funded cost. So everything, all the rest of the bars, the smaller bars, are SGWASA funded. The easement acquisition, just under 1.5 million. Legal and bond counsel costs thus far, 1 million, slightly above 1 million. Other. Bond counsel, of course, is still outstanding because we haven't issued the bond yet. And there's a small amount of legal expenses for the current fiscal year that haven't been expended yet. Easement acquisition is complete, I forgot to say that. So the first 3 bars are pretty much paid out, except for a small amount. The other is the mitigation. I think it was called environmental mitigation fees or something that the board has approved, and the rail pros for crossing the railroads, to just under 300,000. These next bars are going to come into play during construction and at the end of the project, and I'll explain those. So the USDA required us to put a 5,000 contingency in there for extra equipment that may not be covered by their funding. So that's a 5,000 placeholder for equipment that we may have to add SGWASA funding. Contingency, and we'll talk about this when we get to the funding chart next in a little more detail, but the USDA requires you to build in a certain contingency for construction. So this is a contingency that's not built into what the USDA is funding or what the DEQ ARPA fund is funding. We won't know if change orders come to the board for CP1 or CP2 in the future. Just keep in mind that those could be funded out of the SGWASA funded contingency. And then since this does involve a USDA bond with interim financing, there is capitalized interest calculated, and that's required by the USDA before you move forward, and that's calculated as just under $3 million. That would not come due until the project is completed and the USDA closes the loan at the end of construction, which we're right now projecting for April of 2028, and that would be an out-of-pocket expense on SGWASA in 2028 when that occurs. Total project cost with all those taken into account, you'll see that it's just under $84 million project cost to date.
That's a far cry from 35 million where we first started.
5-6 years ago, correct. Any questions on those costs?
35 million would have been a piggy bank compared to what we got if the cost didn't go up so much.
Okay. No more questions on the expense side. We'll look to how that 84 million is going to be funded. So the next chart shows you, okay, of that 84 million, who's funding what. and you'll see that the first bar is SGWASA funded. That's almost up to 14 million. I will put a caveat in there. That's assuming that capitalized interest closes at 2.9 million and the full contingency of 1,252,000 is expended during the construction period. So it could be lower, it could be higher. Because we don't have the interim financing in place yet, we don't know what the true capitalized interest is, but that's a reasonable estimate at this point. So you'll see that in that number, you see the breakdown in that at the top of your chart there of how that basically 14 million of SGWASA fund breaks out. Same things we just talked about on the other chart as far as the expense side. And you'll see that does include the 6.9 million that Scott mentioned when we were talking about the 85 chart over here or graph. The 6.9 contribution that's required by the USDA loan that SGWASA participate, it's not SGWASA funded contribution. So I think that bar is important because as pieces have come to the board, you've approved some easement acquisition, you've approved some legal costs, you knew that USDA was going to require us to kick in about 6.9 million. But I think it's interesting to see that when you pull all those pieces together into one SGWASA funded total, we're almost up to 14 million. ARPA funding, you see 35 million, you knew that. USDA loan, you knew this was 35 million. That's your total project cost of 83,851,000, which corresponds to the expense on the previous chart. So that's how all of those expenses are funded. Any questions?
So easement acquisition, that's the money we have to pay property owners to put the system in?
That's correct. That was the
Am I saying that right,
acquisition,
Jim?
and I'll let the attorney speak to that, but that was the final cost of all the easement acquisitions.
And I'm not, there was a cost of acquisition, like the professional fees associated with that between the land agent and everything else, and then the money that we actually pay the easement owner. So I'm not sure which bucket we're looking at.
Okay, this one is only the acquisition that was paid to the landowners and the recording cost associated with those.
Okay, and
Any
then
legal for your subcontractors is in the legal and bond.
right, and that's the point I wanted to make. That there are two buckets. One is the legal costs that were actual attorney's fees and subcontractors for the appraisers and land agent are in one bucket, and then the actual acquisition costs in another.
So yes, the 1.455 is what was paid to the landowners for the active land.
Right, and just a footnote that we, in our approach to this project, we obtained 100% of the easements that we needed for the entire project area. So for example, when you look at the board of the I-85 lift station property up there at 85 and 56, that was a large parcel that we actually purchased to site that pump station. That cost is done, so there isn't an acquisition cost coming in the future should we want to build that.
Even for the alternates, that's all done
Right, we
too.
thought it was the best approach to get that done now, lock that in now, so that as we move towards, let's say, phased implementation or construction over the years, at least that's done, right?
Okay.
That portion is done. So, all right, thank you, Richard.
Okay. We'll go into fund balance.
Any questions or comments before we turn the page to the next item? No? Okay, thank you.
With all the projects going on and the projects forthcoming, I thought it was an appropriate time, or we thought it was an appropriate time to talk about fund balance and available cash. And before we start this, let me explain to you again, I always do this. Fund balance for SGWASA is different than fund balance for your cities and your counties that you may normally represent. So if you look at your interim financial statements that you get monthly and you look at fund balance on the balance sheet, these numbers are not that number. Because those numbers on our balance sheet include contributed capital when the system's folded together, you've got the assets that folded in. So those skew those contributed capital. Our fund balance on the audited financial statements are not true fund balance for SGWASA. They're inflated by infrastructure that you could never sell and use, okay? So what the LGC recommends and the School of Government recommends, and y'all have heard this a million times, for water and sewer authorities is to look more at available cash. So what is available cash? Available cash for this chart is true available cash at the end of every audited fiscal year, less the accounts payable that should have come out of that but just didn't get paid until after June 30th, less customer deposit refunds, which are a liability that you have to hold on the balance sheet because you assume they have to be refunded when the account's closed. So that's what available cash is on this chart. And that's the fund balance that we're showing you. It's truly available cash. And we divided this into 3 buckets, 3 lines. The first is CIP fund balance. The board's aware that every year we bring to you a CIP reconciliation, capital improvement plan reconciliation. And we say, okay, here's what the board put in the rates. You know that you're funding 95% of depreciation right now. That goes into a pot of money called capital improvement fund balance. And then Scott ties that into an annual CIP plan, which he brings to the board and says, here's how I plan to spend any money that was left in that bucket plus any money we're going to earn this year. You want to pause on that to elaborate on that?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Then we've got operating fund balance, which is truly an operating fund balance. It is just available cash that can be used at the board's discretion for operating expenses, that pays our bills. Right now, operating fund balance, and in the future, and we'll talk about this a little more as we get into the dates. That right now is a cash flow thing where we float, where we're paying $1 million, $2 million in construction for I-85, and we haven't gotten the money back from DEQ yet. So operating fund balance right now provides us with a good, healthy cash flow because we're paying out millions a month, and it may be 30 days before we get that million back. So it keeps us from having to have a line of credit at the bank to kind of float those reimbursements. And then the top line, the red line, is total fund balance. So that just says we don't care what bucket it's in. We don't care if it's CIP or if it's operating. How much total cash do we have? So that's, and you'll see they kind of, the operating fund balance and the total fund balance kind of jive as far as their trends across the chart. Let's talk about the dates a little bit. So we started in 2019 and we said, what's fund balance from 2019 to 2026? You'll see in 2019, CIP fund balance had a healthy $15.2 million in it. Then you'll see the very next year, that plummeted to $2.6 million. Why is that? And I put the bars in there to tell you why that was. That's the water treatment plant upgrade for $15 million. If you'll recall, that occurred. The board committed to that around 2019, and we started paying that money out. So that year, in your CIP designation for year end, we said, okay, board, we're taking this $15 million out of CIP fund balance now because we're going to start paying the invoices of it, and we don't want to leave it in CIP and it gets spent for another purpose, and it's already been committed. So the year that we committed, we reconcile it in your annual reconciliation for CIP, and we show we're going to take this much out of fund balance for CIP because we're going to start actually building it now and paying for it, and we don't want you to leave it in designated fund balance and spend it for another purpose. So that's why you see the whole $15 million plummeted in that 1 year, even though it wasn't fully built and expended until the end of 2022. Does that make sense? Okay. So you see, we'll stay on CIP fund balance for a minute. We'll stay on that line. So you see it dropped to 2.6 because we spent most of the fund balance for the water treatment plant upgrade. That was 100% SGWASA funded, if I recall. And you'll see that the next year it moved on up to 3.6. That's because you have 95%. Back then, I think it was 90% or 85% maybe funded each year to go back into there in your rates. Your rates are funding some to go into that bucket for projects. And that stays fairly steady, you'll see. 5.2, 4.8, 5.2. And then you see in 2026, I say it's going to be 0. Now that is projection. So as we go through here, keep in mind, 5/30 of 26 is projection. Why do we expect that to go to 0? Because right now, the 5.1 that's in there at the end of 2025 that you designated, Scott's CIP plan already commits that to payments this upcoming year to be expended. So we expect it to fully be expended. And some of that, or the largest chunk of that, is the 6.9 USDA SGWASA commitment we've talked about coming out of CIP fund. So if you've got 5.1 and you're going to have to pay out 6.9, you know that there may be a discussion in the future about we can't pay all of that out of CIP fund balance. It may require some operating fund balance.
Okay, can we pause there for a moment? Sure. So when the board approved the 10-year CIP last year, August, September, we had a schedule in there that showed $6.9 million had to be paid as far as the SGWASA portion for the USDA loan. And it was basically put, how would you best express it? It was earmarked, committed across 2 years, last fiscal year and this fiscal year. We did so. The reason we did 80-20 in the funding is so it would allow us to continue to do capital improvement projects that we needed to do out of that CIP. So we saved the money, did not spend the money. It's still there, and then this fiscal year we have the additional money set aside for the I-85 project as well, so that we're covered in that expense as far as the $6.9 million. It just creates, as you can see at the end of the term there, that we're using all of the CIP we have available to us on the payment for the project, basically the I-85 project. So our schedule is very lean in terms of other projects that we're doing. And Commissioner, to your point, we need to pull back on some projects so we can afford this. Well, we built that into the schedule so we could afford this payment and have pulled back on some projects. So when we bring to the board a $997,000 filter project that wasn't in our CIP, you can understand basically the what do I want to say, the effect it had on just available cash, operating fund balance, that we had to fund it because there it was. We didn't have the supporting CIP for that. And I think Richard also mentioned we're at 95%
Funding of CIP.
funding of CIP as far as depreciation. There's been a goal talked about at the Finance Committee for the last several years, getting that up to 100%. We're still not up to 100% funding for that. So I think that's something that as we move forward in our discussions with all of these scenarios and all these projects, it probably would behoove us to at least have that for consideration. What is the net effect of going up an additional 5% to fund 100% depreciation costs into our budget as we look at these schedules? And maybe that's something we can talk about at future meetings, because a lot of these meetings are just going to naturally roll into our budget discussions coming up for our next operating budget. We're already starting in September, basically our operating budgets for next fiscal year and reviewing those. So it's all kind of part of that package. Thank you.
Okay. Operating fund balance is the next line going up the chart. You'll see that it was at just under 13 million in 2019, and you see it jumped to 28.5. That's because that 15 million came out of CIP fund balance mode too. So we didn't have a cash windfall. You see the total didn't change at the top. And then you see it starts to go down. It went to 22 and 17. So by the end of the water treatment plant project, you see that 15 million that we moved from CIP fund balance has now been expended for the water treatment plant upgrade. So that's why that huge peak in operating and then back down to a normal. All you're doing is shifting from one pot of money to the other pot of money, and then you expended it and everything levels back out. 2023, you see it went to 21.7 million. And then in 24, 27.9 million, 2025, 25.8 million. Projected at the end of 2026 is it stays flat. Now you would normally, our rate model is built so that fund balance increases slightly every year. The other thing that plays into operating fund balance is each year you have budgeted X amount for each type of expenditure in your budget. You assume that at year end, some of that may not be spent. You may have budgeted chemicals and you may not need a tanker of chemicals, may have saved you $10,000 this year. So each year you have you may call it profit in commercial terms. It's not really profit for a governmental, but it's the same theory. So you do expect to see available cash increasing each year, operating cash at least. But you see it's flat. In 2026, 25.9 is projected. We expect it to stay flat for the exact reason that Scott just alluded to. In 2020, in the current year budget, the board will recall you're basically expending some fund balance. I think it was 1.5 or 1.8 million of fund balance on capital improvements in the current fiscal year that weren't accounted for in the CIP plan. You just approved nearly a $1 million filter project that there was no CIP fund balance available for. So the board approved spending operating fund balance for that. So you have spent a substantial $2.5 million chunk of fund balance thus far, and you'll see that on the next budget amendment that comes forward to you. You'll see each month you have that table that shows you the accumulated fund balance used for that fiscal year. So just keep that in mind that we are expending fund balance this current fiscal year a pretty decent clip. And then you've got total fund balance. Total fund balance is just a cumulative of the two. It's more important to look at the two lines that comprise that. I will put a disclaimer here that in the 26 projections, there are some items that are in there, and there are some items that are not in there that the Finance Committee needs to be aware of. It doesn't include any future budget amendments. So in the 2026 operating fund, available cash fund balance that I'm showing you projected, I've already taken into account anything the board's already approved as far as budget amendments this year. The original budget, which had the fund balance use, the filter project. So I have deducted those in the projected number. There are some things that are coming forth. Any amount of the 6.9 million USDA contribution we just talked about, I haven't taken that into account yet because we don't know how much of that's being funded by CIP fund balance, how much of it the board's going to want to take out of operating fund balance. It does also not take into account the two, we just looked at the I-85 cost. We saw a large contingency and a large capitalized interest that's going to occur during the next 2 years. Since they are out past 6/30 of 26, they are not in this. So as you look at the 25.8 million operating fund balance, that is still a very healthy fund balance. But keep in mind, we already know that there's going to need to be some chunk of the I-85 USDA contribution coming out of that 25. We know that there's approximately 4 million, should projections stay the same as the USDA budget right now, for the I-85 completion in 2028. Any questions on?
So, since the CIP budget will go down to zero, and because this project is going to come online, I'm tired of talking about these tanks, but I'm sorry. We have 2 digester tanks that we know have to be repaired. Where's that money going to come from? It's not in the CIP anymore. So how are the last 2 digester tanks going to be repaired? Where's that money going to come from?
Well,
And I'm sure it's going to be much more expensive than the first 2.
I don't have the answer for you today. I think we are looking at affordability, I think next year, of doing the design work for those and then understanding the costs related to that to do that construction. But
Why do we need design work? We did the design with the first 2 that were done.
well, that is true. The superintendent approached us and says that he has a better methodology, a lower cost project, especially as far as actual input and electricity consumption that we want to take a look at. So we'll go through a design process for that as well. Have to put it out for bid, look at construction.
Are we looking at solar for any of that electricity? Since those tanks are right out in the middle of
I don't
nowhere?
think it was solar based. It was just a different technology that we're using in terms of bubblers and efficiency of the equipment and how it was done in terms of the digesters. But that's a great question because I think that it balances the commissioner's comment about we need to pull back on projects. It's the challenge here is also how to manage a CIP and do the work that you need to do and schedule it, and then the affordability of such balanced with everything else that we're looking at here.
I mean, I'm just assuming that with all this wastewater going to that plant, we're going to need to operate all 4 digesters. And that's why I'm asking about the other 2.
Yeah, well, everything is in operation. There's nothing that's out of operation. It was just improvements. We were forecasting that if we have problems with two, the same equipment is in the other two, we need to get them replaced. So that's what we were looking at. We are also going through and finishing up in the next 6 months AIA grant work on our infrastructure, both water and wastewater, which is a large condition assessment project for our facilities or our underground facilities. And that will give us details on, is it 10 or 20 year schedules? 20-year CIP projections on needed funding and projects to do throughout the water and wastewater areas. So, for example, if you have a pipe that was put in the ground in 1945 and it's had its useful life, it's going to say this pipe needs to be replaced, it's $100,000. This pipe needs to be replaced, it's $250,000. We're going to get that type of information both on water and wastewater. So you're going to have a really well-defined capital improvement projection that is going to overwhelm you with everything that needs to be done and the fact that you're strained on resources in terms of affordability. So you end up stretching your program out basically to be able to afford the work that you want to do. So the comments about, well, why don't you just start replacing pipes in Creedmoor? That'll fix the problem. Okay, well, you know, this report will show us throughout our service area what work needs to be done and what the associated costs are and the schedules that we can put on that so we can understand through our mix of financing, capital improvement funding that comes in, fund balance, what we can afford to do as far as fixing the system. There's an aging plant out there as well. We have grant funding to do a facility master plan for that facility that will be going on the same time that in the next year or so as we are working on the design for the PFAS facilities and construction. So there's still a lot to come. I think is there any other questions on capital projects specifically?
The building?
Yes,
The building?
the building.
When does our lease expire on this building? 27.
5 years. I think we have 5 years yet.
Oh.
Yeah.
So it's 2030?
It was a 20-year lease starting in 2011, I think.
2031.
Yeah, 2031.
Okay.
So before we move from here, I think that not the takeaway, but point of discussion is, okay, so at some point, will we take our depreciation expense from 95% to 100% of what it should be, especially as you're bringing on new assets? You put new assets in the ground, guess what? These brand new assets that go in the ground in 2020, right now in 2027, have a useful life. We have to start accommodating for their replacement over the next 40, 50 years as well. It's all part of that formula that we use for depreciation to fund for that. There's also how much of the fund balance or available cash do you want to hold in reserve, period, and how much do you want to use to offset some of your project costs that we've demonstrated today? Maybe you bring down your $8 million cost of your Northern Interceptor by putting $4 million of that project from your available cash towards that project. Or maybe you just do a pay-as-you-go, they would say, and say, well, Scott, if you say that we could update that Northern Interceptor for $2 million, and that's all we need to do in the first year of a 5-year project, maybe it's better just to cash fund that and be done with it. Don't take on the additional interest payment for that project, knowing that potentially you've got, it's being paid for as you go with system development fees and so on and so forth. You may have the same perspective when you say, well, I know we have a $26 million, $840,712 PFAS project, right? So how much are we going to use or want to use from that available cash to offset that cost to minimize your debt load for your 20-year or your 40-year? So those are things that the reason we're showing this to you as well, that it needs to have some additional discussion. Because when you say, give us some, let's say after or at the end of this meeting, you say, we look forward to meeting with you in 30 days. Here's some things we want you to do, and we'd like to talk about some rates, what this would look like with these projections, but we want to infuse some of our cash, $5 million, X million dollars into each of these projects. What would that look like in those scenarios? Because obviously you can understand that's going to change some rates by not having that full debt load at that point. So those are things that we need to consider as well, correct?
That's correct. And as we talk about when you transition into the rate discussion, Mr. Lamb's point earlier, there is an option that you could take some of this available cash and you could pay down debt service on some of the older bonds or loans, so that PFAS debt service or that Northern Interceptor debt service is now offset, just like we've got some sunsetting debt that's going to offset the $35 million USDA loan. There is an option to use available cash to pay down debt service. I will caveat that by saying that the debt service that you would be probably paying off, a lot of it is zero interest. So there is a lot of people that say don't pay off zero interest loan and take on a loan for 3.75. The only advantage to that is now it has a minimal impact on rates because you've got sunsetting debt. So you don't have to raise rates to pay your debt service. So those are considerations that we just wanted to bring to your attention. And to Scott's point, if you've got $26 million, now I will say again, for the next 2 years, you're going to need a large chunk of that $26 million for cash flow because you're paying out monthly invoices, millions of dollars in monthly invoices. And there could be a 60-day lag in getting that money back into the bank. So if you spend that down too low, then I don't have enough cash to actually pay those invoices without doing some sort of line of credit, which now we've got more interest expense. But we wanted to bring what we have on hand as you start looking at these projects and what they could cost. To Scott's point, how much do you want to put this money toward this project or that project? That's a Finance Committee board discussion that needs to be in play. Everybody would have a different answer on it. So we wanted to bring all the numbers to you so that you have all the pieces again of the puzzle as you make these very difficult, important decisions going forward.
And there are also so many variables
That's exactly
to this, to our budget thoughts and priorities. I was going to ask if you knew or thought about the minimum fund balance that you think we ought to keep.
You know, so there's an old school rule that 8% is a state requirement. That is not true.
Okay.
There's no mandate to my knowledge that it is required to be 8%. Way back in the day, the LGC kind of gave an 8% answer once upon a time that that's a good, reasonable fund balance to keep in place. Now that was back then the general guidance they would give for don't go below 8%. That's the bare minimum before we get concerned. It was
Right.
kind of the way it was worded. Keep in mind that was for a county municipality
Right.
situation, not an authority where you are totally funded by rates. So that's a board discussion. I've had that discussion with previous finance committees over the years. We've drafted fund balance policies over the years that we tabled. I don't think now is the appropriate time to set that policy, but I think we need to start addressing it. During this period, during this 2-year period until construction's over, I think we need to keep a healthier fund balance for cash flow. After that 2 years when the project is completed and we have a settled kind of monthly expense cash flow, then I think you could reduce it further, much further. 26 million is a very healthy, about 150% fund balance. That's healthy, very healthy. I personally don't have a recommendation today, but I think that's a discussion we need to have, and the Finance Committee, we hope, would give us some guidance on how you would want that fund balance to look. That's another reason we wanted to bring these numbers to the Finance Committee today, is so you can start having those thoughts and those discussions, because you may say, well, I want it to be 50%. Ms. Kaczynski may say, no, I think it needs to be 80. Mr. McLam may say, no, 20 is sufficient. So that's a committee decision and ultimately a board decision. So we wanted to bring all these numbers to you and get you thinking about that. We don't have any guidance at this point, but in the future, I think we will.
Well, I appreciate your comment and your response. And because we're hearing so much about our debt, the variability, the question of revenues, there's so many items to play in this equation. And we're considering using fund balance. To me, I feel like we need to maintain what, the fund balance that we have, not to, I don't want to load fund balances, I guess is what I'm trying to express to you. I don't know if it's a good time for a discussion here, but I think it needs to stay healthy.
Yes, I agree with you. We need a healthy fund balance. And let me just give you one example. Several years ago, when the sewer pipe crossing the creek on VZ Road got knocked out, FEMA paid for it, but SGWASA had to pay the money up front. We had to fund the entire project, including the pump around, and that had to come from our fund balance because it wasn't, it was a natural disaster that you could not plan for. Later on, we got reimbursed for those FEMA funds. But if we don't have the money, or at least, have a healthy fund balance, we won't, if we fund something like that, and we have to fund something like that, it would cause us not to be able to fund other items that we need. So this, as you said earlier, the fund balance for Water and Sewer Authority is very different from the fund balance for a town.
Absolutely, yes.
I'd like to make a comment. I agree, healthy is good. The challenge is going to be trying to offset those rate increases. And are we looking healthy as a 20-year-old or healthy as a well-fit 60-year-old when it comes to healthy? At some point, we need to gauge where the Finance Committee and the board are in terms of healthy. And fund balance percentages are based on, when you say 100%, is based on our operating expense?
That's correct.
So our operating budgets have gone up 15 million, up to 18 million. Is that where we are this year? 18 million. So it's reflected on a percentage of your operating expense because you want to have that balance available related to your operating budget. So when you say 10%, 20%, 30%, that's where that number comes from. So when you say over 100%, okay, that kind of puts it in perspective as well. And if the Finance Committee says we would like to see some scenarios on some of these project costs when you factor in using available cash or fund balance, but not going below a certain percentage, it allows us to work within that frame to provide you with that information. If it's always going to be a sliding scale, we're not sure, then we're just guessing at, okay, well then let's use 10%, 20%, 30%, and we provide you with all those charts and graphs. But at some point, it really needs to be established. And with Richard, with what he said, that with our cash outflow right now in reimbursement scenario over the next couple of years, yeah, it is kind of hard to dial in what is that percentage. But keep in mind, over the next couple of years, what do we have to do? We have to start spending money for PFAS construction,
Right.
not wait till the end, because we have to pay those bills as we're building, right? So there's going to be some of that outflow as well, how we're going to do that. So just continue to give that some thought, not looking for anything today, but it may be something that continues to be on our agenda for discussion so we can get there to provide you with the information you're looking for in terms of overall cost, projects, and rates for projections over the next 5 or 10 years for these projects.
And to further that only real thing I will say is to Scott's point, we wanted to bring you a lot of the known challenges,
Right.
the projects. Here's all the projects now. We talked about you can pay off existing debt service with some fund balance. You can annually use it to offset operating increases so that you're not raising rates as high as you normally would, so that you're using $1 million, $1.5 million a year to keep your rates down. But what I really thought was interesting to bring to the board, to the committee, was, if you say, well, we're going to spend it on PFAS, and you make an award for PFAS, and then you say, well, no, now I want it next year, I want it to reduce rates. Well, it's gone, right? So here's the things you can use it for. Here's the amount you've got to use, and then get the committee, and ultimately, I guess the board as they award things, guidance on, well, no, we can't use $5 million for PFAS and $5 million for I-85 and $5 million to reduce rates because now we've spent 15 or 25 million. So just to give you all the revenue, the existing cash and what your challenges are, and then let the committee and the board decide how they want to spend it.
And if I may, some of the discussions Richard and I have had about this over the past year is, and it reminded me when you just said that, is that he said, maybe we should look at a model where you have like a tiered model, where you would take your available cash and you would say, we'd always want to hold this percentage, just as far as the operating fund balance, but we'd like to dedicate this percentage to offsetting rates. We'd like to dedicate this percentage to this type of project. We'd like to dedicate this percentage as an emergency fund. So that you have this strata, if you will, of how you would spend that cash, but you have those reserves or those bands that you don't touch. You would like to spend this money that's in reserve for cash on this capital project. So all of a sudden, if you have $2 million set aside for emergency projects or unfunded capital, the $1 million could come out of there for the water filter meter project and it'd be fine. You may say that the board really doesn't want to increase rates this next 2 years. We would like to use that band of available cash to offset those rates so we have some of that stability. So you have that guidance and control of how you're going to do it. It isn't simply a savings account that we want to do this now, we want to do this later. As Richard said, you just dedicated, we thought, that money to PFAS construction. It's not there anymore, but a portion could be used to offset a $25 million or $26 million project, right?
Mm-hmm. All right, so I have 2 questions.
Sure.
The first question is, I believe you said operating costs for 1 year is $18 million. Is that correct?
Of the current budget, I believe that's correct.
And the second question is, on a SGWASA bill, can we have a separate line item where that line item goes toward PFAS? Because every community is looking to take care of the PFAS issue and wants the water to be as close to perfect as we can get it. So just say we did an extra $15 or $20 per bill per month, and that should add up to somewhere around $5 million after 3 years. That money is set aside to go to the PFAS so that the customer says, hey, if my bill didn't go up, but I do want better water and it has to be done by 2029, this is going here. Mm-hmm. Is that something that SGWASA can do?
Not with our new billing system.
You can have
It's going to cost us.
have a fee sort of structure on a bill. You can do that just like we talked about years ago. Convenience fee, technology convenience fee for the software increases. I think the only thing I would say, and then we would have to do some research, or Jim would have to do some research, is that if you specifically say we're collecting this money for this purpose, and you're expending money during the next 2 to 3 years while you do this construction, but you're cumulatively collecting this money,
Correct.
And then you wind up at the end with some excess or some shortfall, you may wind up with some legal reserve type of fund balance questions.
Well, I believe he stated it was $26 million as of today for the PFAS.
Mm-hmm.
And if you only collected $5 million and just say interest, you get $5.2 million, you're going to spend every bit of that $5.2 million for that $26 million.
And I think to your point, 2 points here, if I may, we set up project ordinances. We set up an ordinance for a project specifically, correct? Mm-hmm. For these projects, so I think money could go into that project account, correct, in ordinance?
We could capture that money and put it in.
Okay. And secondly, we could show that on a utility bill, as far I believe, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. So to answer your question, yeah, so that you would have you would be able to see visually the money that is going to the PFAS reduction construction project.
I
right?
just see that
instead of being just lost in my bill went up. Correct.
I just see that mentally going to the customer saying, hey, my bill didn't go up, but it has a separate line item. This is why it's got the separate line item.
For that charge.
And I think Richard's point is how we legally structure that's important, because if you do a capital reserve fund, once you put the money there, it's very legally difficult to ever get it back out again. And so you can achieve the same thing as long as you're disciplined by setting it aside and recognizing that's what it's there for, but it gives you the optionality to be able to move it around if you really need to, versus specifically designating it set out in the Local Government Budget and Fiscal Control Act in a way that makes it legally almost impossible to move it again.
I think That's my gut instinct is, I think I'd much rather see it achieved the same way by setting up a line item in your budget called a PFAS fee and put it in your rate schedule, a monthly PFAS fee, because you pass an annual rate schedule that has other fees built in there, late fees.
So that would be a separate line item.
Mm-hmm. And you could still pass it through the bill without making it a true capital reserve at that point. And you could capture it in the CIP fund balance bucket, or we could set up a second CIP fund balance bucket called PFAS specifically. And you can put it in there, and now it's at the board's discretion every year, just like we do with regular CIP fund balance, to use it for that purpose or move it around. I don't think you're legally restricted then.
Well, I guess that would be better to say we happen to get a grant for the $26 million and
That's
we got
correct.
$6 million sitting over here that's supposed to go only to that.
That's correct. And now you can't get, do you refund it? What do you do with it? Or do you
Right.
now do a digester project?
Correct.
So I think you're not legally binding your hands, the board's hands, if you do it through your normal rate schedule setting.
Understandable.
And then how you put it on the bill, that's fine.
Right.
You could still have a per monthly fee instead of a usage based.
Right.
You could still achieve that without making a capital reserve fund that now you've got very legal restrictive.
Sounds excellent.
Yeah, we've recently gone through the same analysis for the county, so I can resurrect that research, and Richard and I can work on that.
That makes it simple and understandable.
It is a good way to relate to the customers. While your total bill
You
is
still have to
increasing,
show some compassion for each of the customers, especially the seniors that are on a fixed
Correct.
income.
Right.
So you have compassion there to say, hey, this is something we have to do. We're not going up on your bill, but we've got to do this. That way you have the clean water that you're asking for without the PFAS.
No, we are required to provide it.
Yes.
Okay. Anything further on your charts and graphs?
Question about fund balance. Wasn't one of the considerations for grants the percentage or amount of fund balance that we had in order to get, like, wasn't that one of the disclaimers? If you have X amount of fund balance, you may not necessarily be successful in receiving as many grants.
there are certain agencies that will look at your fund balance and say, well, you've got enough money in the bank, so we don't need to give you money. There are agencies that take that into consideration. So that is a good point to bring to the committee. I don't think we've been denied in the past any, but that is a consideration. If they look at you and say, you've got $25 million in the bank, use $5 million of that toward this project, we're not going to give you $5 million, and they look over here at somebody else that's a grant application and say, well, they don't have any fund balance, so we need to get that. That is a consideration, I think, with certain agencies.
Well, and working with the USDA for the last 2 years, as we have, and most recently asking them about whether or not we would be a good candidate for funding for PFAS, which they're very encouraging. If you have a fund balance that really is not dedicated to a project, that's when it just sits out there that you have available fund balance. So, for example, if we took year 6/30/2024, because I can see that, and available balance was 27.8, it looks like 27 million.
Mm-hmm.
If we said that year that yes, but 6 million is set aside for the PFAS construction project, they would take that right off. So if you could show how that 27 million was divided up for projects, they would understand that that's money is dedicated to specific projects. That's the benefit of dedicating that money to those projects. Then it's not available cash
Right.
on hand. So that's what I've learned working with the USDA as well for that. So there's a benefit to using your cash and not having so much, especially when it comes to grants and the formula that they use to determine why did SGWASA have to come up with $6.9 million for the I-85 project. It was all part of that formula, that available fund balance was part of that. That's why we were paying $6.9 million, because there it is.
Do they look at other debt service too?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So are you saying if we would have had it dedicated to something, we may not necessarily have to have the same percentage match as a...
I think it would have been more advantageous to us, yes.
I was thinking that was built strictly on project cost, on our contribution.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's the other side though. To So USDA, if they looked at you, you didn't have enough, you didn't have your $7 million sitting there in the bank that you can contribute, they will disallow the loan because now you don't have the required match. So yeah, there's a fine line there between too much and too little. But that is very true. But I don't think it skews your contribution, if I recall, that's required when you borrow money from the USDA.
But having a healthy fund balance also allows us to have these conversations as well. It gives you the flexibility to have a lot of these conversations and what you can do, can't do with rates, stuff like that. So it's a double-edged sword, right?
Thank you.
We'd rather be where we are,
Right.
instead of negative numbers.
Right.
To Mr. Gooch's point, I'd rather have that number and be discussing, you got 10 projects, and which ones do you, then you've got 10 projects, and no, I don't have enough cash to
I
give you.
agree with that.
So I'm always in that.
We just got to make sure we have that good balance.
So let's get it back to the committee here. Anything further on this topic? It looks like we have 2 more topics. Item 12, the LGC application. Anything that the committee has before we move to that item?
Is there a copy of the CIP in this? I don't see one.
No.
Since
No,
we're
that's
talking
not
about the
attached.
CIP fund balance, there's not a copy in here.
No.
Okay.
Before we move on, we were talking about the PFAS fee going on the bill. Is this something we need to discuss more, or is this something we need to bring out at our next monthly meeting
Probably.
for discussion?
Seems like that might be something we come back after doing some research with a recommendation on, right? I think that's
I think so, and I think unless you want to pass a rate change mid-year, which you may not want to do, I think it would be perfect to flow that into our January budget discussions, because you're probably going to want it to take effect July of 2026, not January 1st of 26.
Okay.
But that's totally up to the committee. But yes, I think to Jim's point, I wouldn't feel comfortable just today making a decision. I want some legal guidance on the restrictions of it to make sure there's not some general statute out there that says if you put it on the bill this way, you must do this and that.
Right.
I want some further legal research on that.
So
And we have
talk
to
about
remember-
it in January.
Yeah, and we have to remember that any kind of fee we tack on, $10, $15, $20 per month for anything is in essence a rate increase, because you're increasing the amount of bill the customer has to pay.
But it's not viewed the same. It's
I'm
not
gonna view it the same
it's not a rate increase. It's viewed
on my
as-
personal bill. Yeah, it's not a rate increase, but it's a price increase.
It is.
And
That's what most people look at.
yeah,
bottom
the bottom line of what you
Yeah.
have to pay.
Yeah.
Regardless, somewhere along the way, you're gonna have to go up on a bill. Regardless. And if you do it now, it won't be as substantial when you do have to truly go up on a bill.
What are you thinking, Jim?
I'm not 100% clear. I think what they've laid out for you today is a worst case scenario in a lot of ways, and I'm not 100% clear that you have an immediate need to go up on a bill. I think you could begin, if it made people feel better, designating some funds coming into a capital project fund to support the PFAS project, so that people see it, there's earmarked and that kind of thing. But I'll leave it to you all from a strategy standpoint, whether you want to go up on fees now or not. But if you've got a $25 million fund balance and you're thinking about ways to dedicate and use those funds, and maybe just allocating some of those towards that project in a way that you don't lock them in absolutely legally and preserve the optionality to move them around to another more urgent project if something would come up, would be something I would consider. Scott's your leader on that issue, not the lawyer.
Yeah, we're I think that's an outcome. We're far away from that outcome yet as far as how it's going to be delivered.
We haven't even decided on what system we're going with yet.
Well, you haven't even decided on what that number is you're going to put on the bill. I mean, theoretically, you're saying
No,
$10,
we're just
$15, $20, but we are.
brainstorm.
This idea here was just to give you that broad brush worst case scenario. As we continue to have meetings and refine this, we can get down to position and say, okay, again, with this much financing, a 40-year, using this much fund balance, starting here, that's what that number would be. I think there's an opportunity at that point to say, so how does this get presented then, and how does it get marketed on the bill in total? We're just not there yet. We'll get there.
And I know that this is not the place to say it, but I want to see comparison of three absolute different systems that will filter out PFAS. When I get a message that says Carries is only 15 million, why are we spending 26,000 when we have 1/5 of the population that Cary has? I mean, they've got a lot more servicing to, so
I'm out.
we're not even
with all
we're
due
not
respect.
even there yet. 26 million has been thrown around, but we haven't decided on which system we're going with, and it might not be 26 million.
You have to look at the amount of PFAS that's being removed.
And
In
I
other words,
understand that, but there's
what
different
their
systems.
intake is versus what our intake is.
I would be happy to discuss with you further the costs aligned with our PFAS project specifically, because the board has yet, I haven't even been presented with the final report on the best media to use for
Right.
the PFAS project yet. But based on construction, based on what we know today, and all the costs and media, you're looking at about $26 million. So we will dial that in, because maybe it'll be $23 million.
That's what I'm saying is
Maybe
we're not there yet.
We're not there yet, but we're getting there. We're
But you
there.
have to be
The
proactive and not
The
reactive.
26 million is a
I
good
understand.
number to use.
Yeah.
And don't be swayed by somebody telling you that they're doing a pilot project out there with a company that's trying to develop a medium and get it onto the market, and it's half the cost of what we're using here. We're aware of that, those same technologies that I've described to the board over and over again. There are emerging technologies out there every day that are being discovered that can be used in different ways to reduce PFAS. That's fantastic. And you know what? If somebody comes to us tomorrow afternoon, even though it's a Saturday, with it's only going to cost you $100 and we can fix it, you're going to know about it. We're going to use it. Can they actually do it? Well, in theory, they can.
And
Well,
by
can
the
you,
way,
can you
with-
hit the timeline in 29? Well, no. So we're there. Don't let there's a lot of information out there about this and that, but we can talk about that further.
And with the Cary project, they are testing the system.
They're doing pilot testing yet.
They have not decided to do pilot testing yet. They are testing this system to see if they're going to do a pilot test and move forward with it. If you,
Yeah, I think we'll be happy to dive down specifics on you. If you watch the news article, or if you watch the news release on that, the way that Cary currently treats their PFAS is through powder activated carbon. They inject powder activated carbon at the intake, and by the time it gets to the water treatment plant, they don't have as much PFAS as we have.
to
So
remove.
they don't have the levels of PFAS that we do, that they have to remove.
But our levels have gone down, according to the graph we got a couple months ago. And we're not that far off of 4.
I will give you best project within the timeline at the lowest cost I can.
Yeah. But the thing is, you have to look at the amount of PFAS in the water that you're treating. Cary's level is very different from our level. Our level is very different from what they're treating at Wilmington. Fayetteville. Those cities have much higher levels. Our level is much lower than what they're treating at.
It's in addition
in
to
Chatham
that, it's
County.
quantity based. I mean, you can hear a community tell you that they only spend $3 million on PFAS removal equipment, and you say, "Wow, that's fantastic. We'd like to do that too." What do you treat out of your plant every day? Oh, 1.2 million gallons. Oh, okay. Well, we're 4 million gallons. Okay, so we're not going to get that same cost, but
Yeah.
I'd be happy to dive down on that topic for you. By all means, we're not done with that topic. Let me tell you.
No.
And
Sure.
this company that Cary is doing the test with, if you look on their website, they're showing basically it looks like a storage container, shipping container set up. And the highest level of treatment they've achieved so far is 1.5 million. They think that today, they believe they can go further than that, but at what cost? As you're running, the equipment cost goes up exponentially with the amount you're treating.
Just rest assured that we are immersed in all of this with our consultants, what's going on around us. We've been engaged with the same vendor for the last year. We've been on site with them. We've looked at the same technology. We're proposing additional tests with them and pilot studies here. We may get another $500,000 grant from the state. We'll find out about that this fall, which would allow us to continue this pursuit. And as I've described to the board in the past, we have an opportunity here. Well, first of all, you've got to meet that timeline, number one. That's in front of us.
Do you see that timeline extending?
April. Well, it's April of 2029. That's the only timeline that we have. There's talk that it may be pushed out 2 years, 2029. So, and again, we're permitted at 7.5 MGD. We're only pushing out 3.5 to 4. So how much do you build? What's the cost? What's the technology? That still has to come into focus yet. So what's the total cost? We need to know that. Where are we going to go construction-wise? What's that cost and what's the technology? And we won't be able to take too long to decide what we're going to do. Why would you take that 50% approach? Cost-wise, if you're not treating 3 million gallons a day, you don't need to have equipment in the building to treat something that you're not treating. Secondly, as you get emerging technologies every day with new PFAS reduction, maybe the other 50% of your building gets filled with a newer technology that's lower cost. We're working towards that as well. It's a moving target, except for the due date at this point. So
Yes.
I know that you appreciate that, respect that. So
Well, I know y'all, the staff and everyone on the team is working very hard. And you did an excellent job today presenting all the projects and explaining them in detail. And I appreciate the graphs and the conversations. I do think I like Jim's idea about maybe not putting that PFAS fee and using some of our monies to designate for that. But that's another discussion we can talk about later. But I think that's a good option. And the perception from the people would probably be better if we do it that way. But that's my thoughts right now. Do we have anything else that you wanted to talk about, or did we cover number 12?
I think we're done with 11. I think we can move on to 12 quickly, right, Richard?
Right.
Okay.
12 is just a brief update for something that's on the agenda for next week. Just an update on the process related to the USDA $35 million loan. We finalized a budget 2 weeks ago with them, which is kind of the final project for them. We have submitted an LGC application because to get on the October docket to meet the November notice to proceed, hopefully for CP2, we needed to be on the October LGC approval docket. So we submitted that application. On your agenda next week, there will be a resolution provided by bond counsel that McGuire Woods that the board chose about a year or so ago for this project. That will basically just authorize SGWASA to go to the LGC for an application approval to issue USDA bonds in the amount of $35 million to seek interim funding until the USDA closes and does the bonds. So that's just an update that'll be an item on your agenda next week and give you a chance to ask any questions related to that whole process of how it plays out. Any questions on that? Okay. The only other thing I'll say related to the LGC application is because we're going to be on the October docket instead of November, December, January, they're going to use our audit from 6/30 of 24 versus 6/30 of 25. I'll give you an update very briefly on the audit process. Our field work on the audit is complete. As soon as the LGC releases their template language for the audit, which we hope will be in the next week or so, we should be able to submit our 6/30/25 audit. If you haven't turned in your related party transaction questionnaires, they are holding the audit until those are submitted. And I think there's a couple of those possibly missing. And that's pretty much all for that, unless you have a question on the application process or the audit.
Any questions or comments? Commissioner Gooch, you have any questions or comments?
No, we wrapping up.
We're wrapping up.
Okay, final comments?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I just, we talk about the cost of the I-85 project and the fact that it originally was estimated at $35 million. But also, when we had that original estimate, we didn't have any money to fund it with other than borrowing the money or what we had in fund balance. And the projections then was we would pretty much double the rates in order to pay for the I-85 project at that time. And that was the projection, based on the cost of the project versus the money we had versus the revenue coming into SGWASA at that time and the debt we had on us at that time. So the project had to be put on hold. Then we got $35 million in a grant. But by the time we got that, COVID had hit. We come out of COVID, the prices on virtually everything has doubled. You see it when you go to the grocery store. You see it everywhere you go. You see the prices have doubled since around 2019 or 2019 or 2020. So, we've had that to contend with, and that put us where we are today. But by working it out where we've got debt coming off of us, at the same time we got debt coming on, it reduces the pressure on rates and helps us in that portion of it. And speaking of rates, we've had brief discussions on this. The county puts out a table that shows where all the money goes, your taxes, your property taxes go. I'd like for us to look into putting out a table on where the money from SGWASA goes, the debt service, that sort of thing, and get down into more specific, like what debt we're paying on, because a lot of people don't realize the amount of debt we incurred in building or rebuilding the wastewater treatment plant to meet the Falls Lake rules. And we're still paying on that. And we've got, another 10 years or so to pay on that. And also we've got debt that we assume that goes to 2050, 2052. So I'd like for us to look into that. And that way, when people ask why the rate's so high, well, they've got it. They've got an annual summation of it, and you can readily see why the rates are what they are.
Yeah, I think that's a very good idea.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Georgiana?
I got nothing.
Commissioner McLean?
A lot of money. Thank y'all for doing the hard work of getting everything put together so that we can dive a little deeper into see what all needs to be done. And thank you to all the employees that continue to do the hard work.
Amen.
Absolutely. We want to thank you all for this preparation and setting up the meeting. I think it was very good to have all the transparency, which we always do, but we have more details today and more thoughts to think about. And we appreciate all the hard work you did and the detailed information and the suggestions of how you make better use of the ratepayers' money. And I thought it was excellent. So I'm looking forward to the next meeting.
Well, thank you very much. On behalf of our staff, we appreciate your time. And regarding the next meeting, I would just like to ask the committee, because we always like a couple of takeaways to prepare for the next meeting. I think it would be appropriate for us to schedule the next meeting maybe 30 days out. And of course, we coordinate that with all of you. But before we even would set a date out there for us, we need to understand what it is that we're preparing for the Finance Committee. So let me just tell you about a couple of things that I would like to have for you. Is I would like to have a topic at the next meeting to give you an update further on the I-85 project in terms of just how well we're moving towards the interim financing, the USDA, starting the project. I mean, you'll be aware of that through your board meeting as well. but also to give you some perspective on the Northern Interceptor, because as I expressed today, we still don't know how much we need to do and what the cost is. And so I'd like to have that focus for you at the next meeting to say, aha, this is where we are, this is what we're going to recommend. At that point, we may have some suggestions on how to fund that project. So that would be one topic for us. What else would you like to see from us in regard to the PFAS project or any schedules moving forward? And I know, again, we provided you with a lot of information, but if there's anything that you can tell us today that you would like us to develop as far as scenarios, I know it's going to be challenging, especially here at the end of the meeting, to say, yes, use this percentage or don't use this or look at this funding. But I think that that would be the next discussion that we would need to have at the next workshop to say, okay, you understand where we are. Let's bring up another chart just to kind of show you some of these variables, some of this available cash. What do you think some values are that we could use, or percentages or terms to look at PFAS? Is a 40-year USDA term best with 10% cash or 20% cash or things like that? I think that would be a great work session at the next one that would then help us take that information and then run those schedules for you at the meeting after, let's say the third meeting here in a series. So, but we're open to any suggestions, any demands that you have at this point that we can prepare for the next meeting.
Well, I would like to have, you provide us with handouts at meetings a lot of the time, like this today, which is fine. But the CIP plan has been a handout at a lot of meetings because it's such a big document. But I'd like to see those documents loaded back into the system so that if I go back to an old finance committee meeting, I've got that document there. I don't have to go through 3 file drawers to try and find the hard copy.
Sure.
I could just go back to the last finance committee of 2023 and say, oh yeah, here's a copy of the CIP and here's the one from now. What has changed? I've got no comparison because they're handouts and I have to physically dig through files and drawers and papers to try and find one. Okay. So if there is a handout, if there's a way after the meeting that it could be loaded into the system so that we would be able to just go online and look at it,
sure,
I would appreciate that.
Okay, sure. I'll work with Crystal on that. I'm pretty sure we put all the information together out there. Okay. Richard's note was he prefers 60 days instead of 30 days just because of his project load that he's working on right now with all of our projects. But just the same, we'll work on a day. Maybe it's 45 days out.
Sure.
Do you remember how much Reftelis charges for the last rate study?
I do not.
I don't remember either. I'm thinking it was 20,000 or 30,000.
That sounds familiar. I want to say it was just under 20,000, if I recall, but I can look that up and email it.
I mean, because this is an idea for all of us to think about before we jump into all this actual expense. Maybe we should get another rate study letting them know about all this debt that we're going to incur and see if they've got a better suggestion for a rate study to see if there's a better way that we cannot hit people so hard. Kenneth, I absolutely agree with you that put that amount of money on that bill and let people know you wanted PFAS, here's PFAS. And this is how much it's going to cost every single month. But this is because you wanted it. Maybe we can get grant funding for PFAS since the entire country is doing the same thing. And we'll see. Maybe it won't be so bad. But I think the scenario presented with the worst case scenario and being flat out, this is what it could be. It might be better, but if we sprinkle some fairy dust on it, maybe it'll all change into prettier numbers. If somebody hits the Powerball, maybe they'll fund PFAS construction. But I don't know. I don't know.
PFAS and fairy dust, I hear, so we got to be careful with that.
You like PFAS and fairy dust?
All right, well, thank you. Is there anything further from our finance director?
No, I think we've covered most of it.
Okay.
Chris?
No, ma'am.
Okay. And if we're all in agreement, no more other comments, I accept a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.